Good afternoon. So we are ready to start for our afternoon keynote speech. It's really our great pleasure to have Professor PLaplante and Professor of Software Engineering from Penn State University. Phil has been very active at IEEE. He is a member of the Administrative Committee for the Reliability Society. He's also on the board of governors for the Computer Society, and his research covers many different areas, including software testing, reliability, architecture, etc. And Bill told me that I can tell everyone that I have known him for too many years, so that I cannot do a good summary about his accomplishment. So without any further delay, let's welcome our speaker, Professor PLaplante.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I think the microphone is on. Are we okay up there? Okay, very good. Yeah, we have known each other too long, and I think I probably would give an equally brief and unfair summary of his many accomplishments. Actually, his was fair because that's all I've done. But it's through my activities with the IEEE Computer Society in particular, and also the IEEE USA organization, that I became involved in a very interesting project, the Software Professional Licensure Project. This is a US-centric activity. It has been a dream of certain individuals for probably more than 10 years. It gained real momentum about 5 years ago. I got involved about 3 years ago, so all of the groundwork and hard efforts that led to where we are today, I could take no credit for any of that. But for the last 3 years, I've been very deeply involved in two things with respect to this particular project. One is the development of a licensure examination for licensed professional engineers in the United States. And the second part of that effort, which has taken almost as much time and is one of several reasons why I'm here today, is the socialization and information dissemination concerning professional licensure in the United States for software engineers, because it's a highly misunderstood subject. It's a controversial one. There are people who are very passionate on both sides, both pro-licensure and con-licensure. And part of my role is to deal with these issues, particularly those who are against the notion of licensure, and to help allay some of their fears and disabuse some of the misconceptions. Just to, as a punchline, or to jump to the conclusion, licensure of professional software engineers as professional engineers in the United States is going to happen, and in fact, in 2013, the first exam will be offered. We'll talk a little bit about where that might apply. It's not clear that all 50 states and 4 jurisdictions will adopt licensure as mandatory in 2013, but many of them will. And within a fair amount of time, all of them will. So that's one aspect that I want to talk to you about, is the licensure project, why there is a value-based, a merit case that can be made for licensing certain software engineers as professional engineers. Not all, in fact, not most, but some. I want to talk to you about why that's important. I'll tell you a little bit more of the details of the U.S. licensure project, how it came to be, the current status, though I jumped to the punchline. Also some details as to how the test was developed, because in order to impart a high level of confidence in the test, we have to convince the public that we did our due diligence, that we didn't just make up questions like professors do, and with trick questions and vague answers. And it's a very rigorous process to develop these tests. I'll talk about that. And then I want to spend some time, probably more than half of the time I have allotted, talking about the notion of, well, we certainly don't need to have professional engineers working on every software system, but which ones does it make sense to have them work on? And the term that's often used is systems that affect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Software systems, hardware systems, bridges, it doesn't matter. If that system can affect adversely the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and if the individual involved or individuals involved in constructing that system have direct access to the public, that is, they're not working for some big corporation, they're not working for the government, they don't have an exemption of some kind. But if they're working directly for the public, what kinds of systems do we consider affecting the health, safety, and welfare of the public? And that is not a simple question. In fact, it's, in my opinion, an unanswerable question, or one that is going to take a lot of time to settle. So I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about that, because one of the outcomes of identifying what do we mean by critical system is, if something goes wrong with a critical system, who is to blame? Is it the software engineer who wrote the code? Is it the software engineer who did the design? Is it the software engineer who wrote a component that someone else incorporated into the system? Or in the case where we have multiple systems interacting, some of which are obviously critical, infrastructure systems to control, power plants, but communicating in some way with another seemingly non-critical system, but it was the non-critical system that triggered a chain reaction that caused the fault. Where do we lay the blame? And I hate to use the word blame because that's a pejorative, but ultimately, as you know, all of these questions are not going to be answered by engineers, really. They're going to be answered in courts by juries and judges with the assistance of attorneys, plaintiffs' attorneys, seeking big damages. So I want to talk about those issues. I want to have a little bit of fun with it and propose a couple of frameworks. I've thought about this problem for a long time, obviously, well, at least for the 3 years I've been involved in the project. Spoken to many people about this project in venues like this and have absorbed their ideas. And I want to propose some of the challenges and some of the potential solutions to those challenges and get you all thinking about this. I mean, what better place than NIST to talk about the issue of, what is the standard setting for critical software system? No one can answer that question today. That's one of my contentions. No one can answer that question today. Or conversely, everyone can answer that question, because critical to you may not be critical to me, and vice versa. So we want to talk about that in some detail, and then we want to talk about the future of where this is all going. So I want to motivate this. Actually, we talked about, Dr. Wong was talking about pizza in his last presentation, and it reminded me that I was going to talk about pizza here. There's a new pizza vending machine, and I'm not making this up, but these exist in Europe, apparently. These are hot pizza machines that they don't just, heat up a frozen slice of pizza in a microwave. They actually roll out the dough, they squirt sauce on it, they put cheese, your selection of toppings, and then they bake this pizza. I'm not making this up. They bake this pizza on demand out of a vending machine. And these machines are now going to be offered in the United States. And obviously there's who knows how much, I haven't investigated this software involved in this processing, but there's software there, or at least there's firmware controlling the process. But at the same time, there's elements in that machine, in that device, that could blow up, perhaps. Wired incorrectly, whatever, too much sauce, who knows? And, two little kids ordering pizza one day at a school could be seriously hurt, God forbid, maybe even killed. Might turn out that pizza machine was an evolutionary increment from some device that some hobbyist or some smart person with a little bit of experience, maybe tinkering around, had written a little code and built a little prototype, and maybe sold a couple of these things somewhere, and that got acquired, and lo and behold, a bigger corporation purchased it, Big Al's Pizza Vending Incorporated, and they utilized a lot of what was working from this prototype, and lo and behold, it turns out that it was the code, some of the code that was written by this original entrepreneur that was the cause of the accident. I mean, we talked about fault localization and determining where the cause of the fault can be identified. So, who's at fault here? And again, this is a question that has no real answer. But it might be the case that this young person who, or maybe not a young person, whatever, this entrepreneur who wrote this prototype and wrote the code for the prototype had no formal training whatsoever. Self-taught, brilliant, maybe a great programmer in Java or C++, who knows, who cares. But somehow it was through their fault that the device exploded and killed someone. Maybe Big Al's Pizza should have done better due diligence when they acquired that prototype code from this entrepreneur. So maybe they are at fault there too. Again, this is something that lawyers are going to decide, not us. I'm just raising questions here. But one question is there something that could have been done to reduce the risk that we expose the public to by allowing anybody, just anyone, to write code that could eventually find its way into a device that could potentially harm people? Well, this is obviously the value proposition for licensure that is given. And interestingly enough, as a software engineer, this is something I don't lie awake at night worrying about this, generally because I don't write code for a living anymore, thank God. But you know what? I teach a lot of people who do write code for a living. What if one of them screws up because, well, but in Professor LaPlante's class, that's how he told me to do it. It's his fault. Do I expect to find myself on a witness stand one day? I don't know, maybe. Lawyers are greedy in that respect. I mean, they'll just, fortunately, I don't have deep pockets, so maybe I'm not a good target. No, the purpose of licensure, and by the way, this doesn't just apply to software engineers. Set aside software engineers for a moment and the notion of whether we should license them or not. Think about barbers. Think about plumbers and electricians. Think about tattoo artists. In most states, a tattoo artist has to be licensed. Got a tattoo there, right? I don't know if you knew that. They have to be licensed. Why? Why the hell do you need to license a tattoo artist? I mean, it's art, isn't it? Yeah, but there are things that tattoo artist can do to harm you if he or she doesn't know what he or she is doing. Using needles that aren't clean. Maybe there's some aspect of the process that can introduce air bubbles. I don't know. But we license these people so that they're aware of these minimally necessary precautions that have to be taken before they avail themselves to the public to start putting needles in people's bodies. But we do the same thing for hairdressers in most states. They have to be licensed. Why? So they don't burn your hair with the hydrogen peroxide. I don't know. This is why we license software engineers. You'd be surprised, I have not done an extensive study of all the different trades and professions that are licensed. And they do differ from state to state. But every state licenses engineers, not yet software engineers. Every state licenses physicians and nurses and accountants and lawyers. These are professions that we might equate in stature with engineers. But they also license barbers and plumbers, tattoo artists, I think pest control experts, you name it. Pretty much many states will license just about anything. Some people will say they license these people so that they can get money out of them, right? This is it's just to raise revenue, because that's sort of a cynical view. And again, I don't want to what I don't want to do today is debate why should there be licensure or not, because it doesn't matter what we think. It's happening. What I want to help you understand is the ramifications and the problems that are going to arise from licensure. Incidentally, I don't know if you knew this, but it wasn't until the end of the 20th century, the early 1900s in the U.S., that there was full, nationwide, consistent licensure of physicians. I mean, until the 1899, in some states, you could go and have some, backwoods doctor with no education whatsoever, but calling themselves doctor, and putting poultices on you. Who used to watch the Beverly Hillbillies? Remember, Granny used to call herself doctor. She had some backwoods license in, bone setting. This was the case for physicians until the early 1900s. There's a great book, and I can't remember the author's name, but the title is called The Social Transformation of Medicine. And it talks about physicians were, or people practicing as physicians were really opposed to licensure, many of them. Some weren't. Individuals who used physicians, many were opposed to, this is crazy. What do you mean I can't go to Granny for my poultice? You know, I mean, she cured everyone I know. She delivered every baby that I know. She delivered me. Who's to say she can't be a doctor? These are some of the objections you hear. Another one is, well, just because you license software engineers, it doesn't mean that they're not going to introduce errors into code. That's true. Just because you license physicians doesn't mean that they won't kill people through malpractice. It happens. Anyway, I'm digressing. One other thing I want to note, licensure is different from professional certifications. And there are loads and loads and loads of these, right? Professional societies provide certifications like the Computer Society CSDP, Certified Software Development Professional, or what is it, the ISC squared. It's CISSP, Certified Information Security. JR, you have that. Certified Information Security, Software System Security Professional, or? Thank you. Certified Information System Security Professional. He knows because he has that certification. Project Management Professional from PMI. But companies also certify people. You can be a certified Microsoft whatever. By the way, certain states have in the past sued Microsoft, and Canada as well, to prohibit them from using the term engineer because it somehow corrupted the understanding of what an engineer really was. Again, a topic for a different day, and there's lots of papers written about this that we can skip. So let's talk about engineers now. Why do states license them? They license them not to certify that they're experts, that they're excellent, that they're good. They certify them to ensure they're minimally competent. Why do states inspect restaurants? To ensure that the food is delicious? We know that's not the case. Why do they do that? They do that to ensure that minimal standards of sanitation are being applied. That's it. Minimal sanitation standards. Not that the food is excellent. My friend Jeff Foss is in the back there. Clean pipes can still provide dirty water, right? You can still get crappy food from a clean sanitary restaurant. You can still get bad software from certified or licensed professional engineers. It's not the point of it. The point is to ensure minimal competency. Does the person even know what it means to test software? Do they know several approaches to test? Do they know the difference between one type of testing and another? And that's just talking about testing, not the full life cycle. We'll get to that. What really the intention is to prevent Granny from setting herself up as a doctor, calling herself as a doctor, and inviting the public into her offices so she can perform surgery when Granny has no training whatsoever. The purpose of licensure for engineers, let's say civil engineers, is so that PLaplante can't set himself up as a civil engineer, call himself an engineer, slick marketing campaign, invite people to come, and I design a garage for you, for your business. That would be an application for civil engineer, perhaps. And then the garage collapses and kills people because I don't know anything about structural design. But I tricked you. I tricked you. That's the purpose of licensure. Licensure is involved if the engineer is involved in building the system and if that system can cause significant harm. We'll get to that second point in a moment. If they are offering the services directly to the public, meaning, hey, if you work for Boeing or Lockheed, if you work for the federal government, you don't need an engineering license because you're working through an entity that, in essence, absorbs the liability if something goes wrong. On the other hand, if it's just you in a rented storefront, you've got nothing to lose. Well, the storefront, I guess. What's of interest, an interesting point is what do we mean by involvement? I could do a whole riff on just that, but it means more than just writing the code. It means being involved in any aspect of the building of the system. In the case of a software system, it could be requirements elicitation and representation, design, construction, testing. For a bridge, it can be all those things as well. Designing the bridge, acquiring the materials. Civil engineers don't build the bridges with their own hands, of course. They have specialists build it, iron workers and concrete specialists. So, and I want to get to the more interesting points soon. I only have a half hour or time left, and I want to leave at least 10, maybe even 10 minutes for your questions, because this talk always generates lots of questions. This issue of licensure, so I want to get past the licensure status and get to some of the more interesting questions. Licensure of software engineers has been debated for a long time. If you search the literature, you'll see articles going back to the 1990s, early 1990s, talking about this. ACM has never been on board with this concept. The IEEE has been on board but conflicted at times. IEEE, like the ACM, is an international organization. The project here involves only the United States, so the IEEE has to be careful about not, appearing to be too US-centric. Though I will tell you, this licensure project has attracted attention of other countries that are interested in what we are doing. In 1998, Texas took the lead, actually. It had a very forward-thinking executive director of the Texas Board of Professional Engineers, and he decided that Texas was going to be at the forefront of licensing software engineers, and they decided to do it alone, go it alone. But they didn't license software engineers by test. They did it through a portfolio review. You had to reveal all of your experience and the kinds of projects you worked on and get letters of reference and that sort of thing. And in 1998, they licensed the first engineer. As a sidebar, I mean, I know that man very well as a personal friend. His name is Don Baggart, Dr. Don Baggart, who's been an advocate for software licensure since before then. He became the first licensed professional engineer in the United States through Texas just yesterday. And he's on the committee. He's been on the committee to develop the exam. Just yesterday, he sent in his resignation. He deregistered as a professional engineer. He changed careers and is now a campus chaplain. So he got out of the business and I joke with him that he got so scared off by the devil of software engineering that he went the other way. But our first software engineer actually has retired. These are the states, by the way, in order to get as far as we have gotten today to write the exam, we had to have 10 states in writing, and that means getting 10 state boards of engineering to agree that they would offer the exam if it was available, and those are the states that agreed. However, I will tell you that the licensure laws for states are such that they don't have to explicitly say, now we're requiring software engineers to be licensed. Many states, the law is written so that if there is an exam available through the appropriate agency, I'll tell you about that in a minute, then it can be offered, and individuals then must be licensed in that discipline. Wyoming, I think, is an example of a state that fits it. D.C., the District of Columbia, which has its own separate board, I know for a fact, because I spoke to those folks, will be offering the exam if someone requests it. So it's more than just these 10. And eventually the others will follow, I'm sure. The first exam is ready. It's been written. It's been pre-tested. It's going to be delivered in 2013 in April. That's when all the other engineering exams are offered, by the way, at the same time in the same places under armed guards. Very close. People have actually gone to jail for cheating on the exams. I kid you not. People have gone to federal prison for getting caught cheating on licensure exams. I am not kidding about that. In fact, at the headquarters of the NCAAS, where there's a display case with an elaborate device that was constructed with like a vest, with like cameras in it, recording equipment, transponder. This is about 15 years ago this happened. And somebody walked into the exam and tried to photo record and talk their way through the exam, and they got caught, and both of those people ended up going to federal prison. So it's kind of, that thing is there as a warning. Last couple slides on licensure. It's not an easy thing to get your license in any engineering discipline. You have, in any state in the United States. There are exceptions, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but typically you need a 4-year baccalaureate degree in the engineering discipline of interest from an ABET accredited school. And that was a problem for software engineering, by the way, for years, because there were not any ABET accredited baccalaureate degrees in software engineering. Now there are, I think, at 20-something schools, including Penn State at Erie. One of our other campuses has a baccalaureate degree in software engineering that's ABET accredited. You have to pass the dreaded Fundamentals of Engineering examination, which is a comprehensive exam of many, many disciplines, and it scares a lot of people. Hell, when's the last time you took a course in thermodynamics? Or if you're a computer scientist or an IS person, you never took that course probably. You may never have taken a course in fluid mechanics or statics or dynamics. Or maybe the math you took was not differential equations. they're all on the exam. And you have to pass it. Again, I don't want to go into the reasons for why that's the case. And things are changing on the fundamentals of engineering examination too. It's becoming more discipline specific to make it a little bit more tractable for those who never took fluid mechanics and so on. I didn't when I got my PE. By the way, I have a PE license, not in software engineering, obviously. I received mine, earned it, took the test more than 20 years ago in electrical engineering, which was the closest discipline to what I was doing at the time. I had a master's degree in electrical engineering, as it turned out, but I was working as a software engineer on embedded systems. So I had to bone up. I had to really study to pass all those other components. But it can be done. If I can do it, believe me, anybody can do it. You need to have 4 or so years of experience. That number changes depending on the state a little bit. And it has to be relevant experience. Not selling software at Egghead wouldn't count as relevant experience. Is there even Egghead software anymore? That's the first one that came to mind. Then you have to pass the discipline-specific exam. That's the P&P exam, the Principles and Practices exam. This is the only exam that was missing, and that's the one that I've been working on. We have been working on, my committee, for 3 years. I should mention that there's a waiver process in most states that allows someone, you've been writing embedded system software of a critical nature for 30 years, but you never got a college degree. You might be okay. Depends on the state. And that's why I don't want people to panic too much. One of the other projects that I've been involved in that's related is to write a template, an abstract class for the law for licensing software engineers. That's in the process. It involves a bunch of people from all over the country. And this is to give guidance to legislatures if they wish to adapt their laws somewhat. I'm dreading getting a letter from, Madison, Wisconsin, inviting me to go and be in some legislative session. Really, I do. I don't want to deal with that. And there's 50 states plus 4 jurisdictions or whatever. I'm dreading that prospect. I hope it never happens. These are all the people that were involved in getting us to where we are today and this licensure exam. The NCEES stands for the National Council of Examiners of Engineers and Surveyors. They own and support all of the licensure exams for all engineering disciplines. And as I said, the software engineering discipline is being constructed in the same way as every other engineering discipline. The National Society of Professional Engineers, for obvious reasons, has been motivated to push this and have done so. Have provided financial support, to pay for me to come here today, for example, and to go to the meetings. The IEEE USA and Computer Society I mentioned. Texas Board of PE has been at the forefront. Why? There's lots of software companies in Texas, a lot of software companies that build embedded systems. They wisely saw this thing coming. They knew it was going to happen one way or another, and they wanted to get out in front of it. That's my read of the situation. And then Prometric is the company that does psychometric testing, right? They actually manage several other licenses, like the nursing examination and NCLEX. I think they do the medical examination for medical doctors. So these people, their core competency is in psychometrics. And I got to tell you, I learned more about psychometrics and testing. You would think in almost 30 years as a professor I would know something about testing. I knew nothing, which is frightening. Shit, I didn't know anything about testing. I learned a lot about testing, test reliability, and validity are 2 concepts. So again, I want to actually the timing's just about right, half on this, half on the other part. What I want to show you here is simply that to construct just the test specification, not the exam items. We call questions items in our vernacular. It took almost a year and a half. We had to do a psychometric study of a statistically sufficient number of software engineers working in mission-critical systems to understand what the domain looked like, the professional activities and knowledge skills for those kinds of software engineers. Now you might say, well, there's the SWBOC, if you know anything about the software engineering body of knowledge. Why not use that? Because that was constructed with a lot of pain and blood too. Well, the problem is SWBOC is very universal. It focuses on everything, including mission-critical systems, but everything else. We wanted to narrow our focus only on systems that affected the health, safety, and welfare of the public in a certain way. And we defined what that meant for the purposes of the test. So we did a pilot survey. We sent out invitations to, about 3,000 people. We got a high return, about 300 of those 3,000 responded meaningfully from those statistics, and we did do very significant statistical analysis of the results. We looked for indices of agreement between groups. You know, gee, were there differences between ethnicities or geographical differences in the way engineering is practiced, or age differences, or gender differences, and interestingly enough, for almost every question we asked, the indices of agreement were consistent. There was only one, and there were, for a few items, where two groups disagreed on things. Can anyone guess what those two groups might be? And it's not male, female, or anything like that, sir.
Fortran and C program.
Nope. I'll give you the answer. It was between, gee, wasn't it amazing that those with less than 5 years of experience viewed things somewhat different than those with more than 5 years experience? There were certain things where, I think there were 8 items where there was a statistically significant difference. Gee, you know, requirements aren't that important when you've only been developing software for less than 5 years. So, and the reason for doing this, and this work has not yet been published yet to the mainstream. I've been trying to get it published. Hopefully it will appear somewhere. Unfortunately, there's not enough meaningless mathematics in the paper to make it of interest to the mainstream journals. It's only about reality, so why would they want to publish that? But once it's published, my hope is that this will give people confidence that the test specifications were done in a way that is meaningful. By the way, this is what it turns out. It's an 80-item exam taken over 2 4-hour periods on the same day. You get a lunch break. Multiple choice, this is the way they're all done. Paper and pencil, though, they have not made it computer-based yet. That's coming in the future, but not the near future. You can see how the breakdown focuses heavily on requirements engineering, and then this new area, which is not the same in SWEBOC, called safety, security, and privacy. Go figure. We're building life-critical systems. But that's not to say that there aren't issues of safety, security, and privacy in every one of the other areas as well. Of course there are. This drives a heavy, heavy emphasis on questions involving this, safety, security, and privacy across the life cycle. I don't have any questions to show you today. A, lack of time. B, in a few months we'll be posting sample items, sample questions to the web for all to see, with answers, a discussion as to how we develop the distractors, and so forth. So someone who wishes to take the exam in April will have time to prepare. And then there's just, okay, the only thing I want to tell you here is that lots of meetings, and every item, every question is examined by at least 5 licensed professional engineers who, by the way, are working in the real world. I'm one of the few on the committee who doesn't work in the real world anymore, because mostly I'm an administrator. The rest are building nuclear plants, automotive applications, that sort of thing, real mission-critical systems. I built the committee with that in mind. Real practitioners, apologies to my friends from academia, not too many academics, real working software engineers who are building real mission-critical systems where the skin is in the game, where lives are on the line. All right, who would need a license? No, only those who are providing their services directly to the public. Look, I'll jump this because this I think is going to be posted somewhere. People often say, well, I've been working as a software engineer for 20 years. Are you telling me I'm going to lose my job if I don't get a PE license? I'm going to have... No. The answer is no one knows how many people will truly need to be licensed. I'm guessing it's less than 5% of all people who are working as software engineers, maybe even less than that. We won't know, for some time now, until the laws are fully matured and ripened. But I think it's less than 5% of all working professional software engineers. This will really matter for them. I truly believe that. And I'll skip, the question of how do we determine how. I had dreams and hopes of doing some analysis to try to estimate how many would need licensure and how many would get licensure. Those plans never came to realization, but who cares now? Because by next year, people will be starting to take the exam. And it's going to be what it's going to be. Let's get to the interesting questions. And this is, Bureau of Labor Statistics stuff on growth. What's the problem with systems? What kinds of systems will be encompassed in this notion of health, safety, and welfare of the public? Well, typically we'll find these systems in medical applications, implantable devices, transportation, certainly. I've got some example. Implantable medical devices or devices that are not implantable but which dose something, radiation, insulin, medicine, robot surgical devices, that sort of thing, certainly will matter. will come into play. We're all familiar with Theric 25 and the radiation dosing catastrophe. By the way, which had the pizza oven example was really just a thinly veiled metaphor for Theric 25, right? That original system was built in somebody's garage or basement. They built prototypes. They sold those prototypes. They became matured. They got distributed. And bugs that they had introduced in that basement were the problem. So that pizza machine was, you know, the Carter racing problem, if you know what I mean. But instead of the space shuttle, it was Theric 25. So these applications, you can imagine all the kinds of applications. Automobiles, we have braking systems, safety restraint systems, and so forth. What about the software radio in the automobile? You know, software-controlled radio, that's a big deal. Could that be a problem? Nah, it's entertainment, you know. I don't know, if the software-controlled radio freaks out, suddenly blares a loud sound while I'm driving, causes me to lose control, I smash and kill someone, I'm in court now, what am I going to say? It was the radio's fault. And the guy who wrote the software that controls the radio, it's their fault, right? Isn't someone going to do that? I think someone will. So we have to be careful. There's less obvious things. Well, certainly amusement park rides. A lot of these are software controlled now, and unfortunately people get killed and maimed on these things far too often. Consumer goods, and so we can go on. And that's the problem. We can go on and on and on. We can come up with scenarios. Somewhere I wrote a scenario about an automated tattoo machine. These don't exist as far as I know. But imagine if there were. Okay, so the tattoo machine tattoos your arm. And by accident, instead of tattooing the name of your wife, Jane, it tattoos the name of your ex-girlfriend, Jean. And you go home and your wife kills you. It's the tattoo machine's fault. Caused her to fly into a rage and kill me. So we can have fun with this all day, can't we? Look at these different critical versus non-critical question mark applications. I don't know, that remote-controlled model airplane that maybe has some software in it. Why not? Can that kill someone? Well, I guess. I mean, it could crash into some little kid's head and cause major injury. The propeller cuts them up. Certainly a drone aircraft like the ones that are crashing all over the place now. One just crashed on the Eastern Shore a couple weeks ago. Of course, I just bought a house there. Fortunately, it didn't hit my house. The hot pizza vending machine. What about the soda vending machine? Maybe there's some software in there. Can that kill you? Probably not. I don't know. But you could probably contrive a scenario and so on. This is the problem. So trying to identify a specific machine and its purpose is not a good way to identify critical systems. In fact, I don't think it's possible to create a taxonomy, with columns and rows like I showed you there. Because it's some kind of, a Gödel incompleteness problem. I can, in fact, I can use Cantor's diagonal algorithm probably that'd be fun, to show you that you could never completely describe all licensable systems using a matrix taxonomy. There's a good problem. There's the idea for my next paper, Jeff. Gödel incompleteness and the Cantor's diagonal argument for taxonomy of critical systems. More likely what's going to happen is these things are going to be built, or as they're being built, people are going to say, ooh, this might be a system that is going to come under the licensure laws. Remember, if it's being built by Raytheon, who cares? I shouldn't say that. It's on tape. It would be exempted by industrial exemption because Raytheon certifies that that system is safe. And if something goes wrong, Raytheon will get sued. Much better to sue Raytheon than to sue the engineer working for Raytheon, who's not making millions of dollars a year. More likely, they're going to be identified as built. So I thought about this a little bit. I said, well, can we create some questions that can be used to determine if a particular software system or a system with embedded software would have some adverse effect on the public, could affect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. So I come up with these identifying questions, things like this. Does a software-controlled device or devices that could directly inflict harm? A software-controlled lawnmower that could run over your foot if it misnavigates. Does the software put certain assets of an individual's at risk? We have to begin to think about financial risk, not just physical risk. What if some piece of software is controlling a pension system and through poor security mechanisms or through malicious hacking, whatever, it exposes the accounts for an entire swath of pensioners for some, and tens of thousands of people lose their livelihood. does that affect the health, safety, and welfare of the public? I would argue that it does. Or if it exposes the medical health records for thousands of individuals. What about one person? Well, we have to discuss that. Is one less important than 1,000,000 or 1,000? I don't know. I don't know. But we have to ask this question because every time you use your credit card, you're taking a risk. So if the system doesn't expose you to more risk than every other system, maybe we shouldn't classify it as being, one of these critical systems. And then finally, the identifying information question, right? So we have to worry about exposing your credit information and credit cards, but also, expose the fact that you have HIV and you get discriminated against and you lose your job, something like that. We have to protect against this as well. FERPA, HIPAA, all those compliance laws that are important to us. And then this is the killer. What about the software that interacts with these other systems in such a way that this happens? For example, if system A is a healthcare records system that has all your personal and identifying and medical information, and it interacts directly with some game that somebody in the hospital plays with, and that game has a vulnerability that allows access to the health information so that it can be exposed, maybe that game should have been a problem. Again, I don't know. I'm at the point in life where I don't have to answer questions. I just get to ask them. Good questions. Hopefully these are good questions. So just using those particular questions, we might be able to say that, well, that insulin pump, the automotive braking system, going back to that table that's several slides back, we might say that those were yeses to question 1. Maybe the financial systems, like tax preparation software, an e-commerce site, whatever, maybe answers yes to question 2, and so might also be subject to the criteria. Maybe tax preparation, software and pension, maybe question 3. And again, I want to remind you that we're talking not about, this is not going to affect Quicken. Only somebody who sets themselves up as an individual selling software that competes with Quicken. Fred's tax software services might end up being subject to the licensure laws in this case. Then I worry about interactions and how do we classify these interactions. So we have this sequence of interacting systems, starting with system 1, which is the one that directly interfaces with the human, but through some chain of communication, all the way through to some other system that's far down the chain. Something happens here that causes a problem here, and chain reaction. What is the liability of somebody who's built this system or this system? Who is responsible for the failure? At what level do we say, well, come on, this is 10 interfaces away. We can't hold this person responsible. I guarantee you that lawyers will be thinking that way, especially if this is a Microsoft product at this end here with big bucks involved. So I thought about this and I said, well, maybe we ought to just make liability some kind of distance metric, right? So if you're directly interacting with the human being and something goes wrong, you're 100% responsible. But if you're one handshake away, one communications protocol away, maybe it's 1/2. And if it's 2, maybe it's 1/4. And make this thing, kind of a square law. And we can argue about whether it's a square, a cube. That's something we can play with. But do we really want to be talking about 1/64 of anything or 1/32? And we have to take into account some of the problems that when system number 4 was built, it might have been 27 years ago, and nobody even thought about system number 3 and system number 5 that it communicates with, and so forth. We don't know whether these systems were designed to stand on their own, and then SCADA systems, right? Everybody knows about security vulnerabilities in SCADA systems. That were built many years ago with no intention of them interacting beyond just the shop floor, and lo and behold, over the years, they became intercommunicating with other systems, and before you know it, this exposed all kinds of issues and vulnerabilities. So it's not so easy. And what about complex interactions? Forget about that linear model. What about a nonlinear model that I'll show you in a minute? I mean, do we really like this? Do we really want to talk about 1/64 liability or 1 to the, 1 over n to the some power? Who cares? Do we really want to talk about that? I don't think so. By the way, this happens in other domains. I'm on the board of directors of a small highway construction, $80 million highway construction company. And would you believe that the company just got sued a few months ago because a road we built 10 years ago, there was a curve in the road and it caused somebody to drive off the curve of the road and they got hurt and they weren't killed but they were seriously injured and now they're suing us for something we built 10 years ago. The ramifications of this being successful, and it won't be successful, they're just looking for a payout. But if they were to prevail, can you imagine? No one would want to build roads anymore because the moment your dog was killed on that road because somebody skidded, you sue them, even if they built it 100 years ago. So there are great ramifications when we try to allocate responsibility without thinking about it, but yet it happens. And what about complex interactions? So, we're not just talking about linear interactions. There's all these nonlinear kinds of interactions. How do we allocate responsibility or blame in these things? Who knows? Who knows? I don't. I think, of course, the punchline being that each one of these instances are going to be litigated on a case-by-case basis. Do we need to consider some sort of transitive closure of all possible interactions of systems in some domain? That would be terrifying to me. It would be terrifying to me. Do we have to include every non-critical system because there's some little thing, look, even systems that are not directly connected and are not communicating but might be running on the same platform and a side effect from a program that completed running might have created a side effect that affected the next program that ran, which was the critical program, and caused a problem. Something was left in a register that didn't belong there, or some device was put in a state that it shouldn't have been in, or whatever. You can imagine how difficult this is going to be to deal with. What are the responsibilities of the engineers in those cases? And as I said, these questions are hard questions. These are wicked problems in my Ritter's wicked problems in my opinion. Can you use formal modeling, by the way? I don't think so. I thought about using various different mechanisms for trying to model these things. I have to say I did not put in a lot of effort to truly tackle the problem. This is something nice for a graduate student, a PhD student to play with maybe. I personally don't think that this is the solution. And I don't know that the mathematical formulation is going to ultimately satisfy. Look, let me tell you something. If you've ever been in a courtroom and you tried to explain the square of something to a jury or a judge or a lawyer, you would be shocked at how hard it is to do. Forget about something, we're going to use Church's lambda calculus now to model this problem. Even if you're right, you're going to lose because you're not going to be understood. So I don't think these approaches are going to work. And they don't take into account all the other kinds of things, like the frame of mind, the state of mind of people, or the pressures that may... These things can't be quantified, in my opinion. So people have to think about this more, people with greater minds than mine, perhaps. What about third-party components? Software that's been built in other countries, software that's taken from open source communities, or where the states, at least for the time being, where there isn't licensure required, but the software is constructed there, or in places where the code is written, but there's no transparency. Hey, here's some black box, and we're not allowed to look inside of it, but we've got to use it for some reason. How do we use these things? Well, this bridge is here for a reason. This is no different than any other engineering discipline where, hey, I'm the civil engineer specifying the bridge, and it's going to have steel in it. I don't build the steel with my own hands. In fact, that steel almost certainly comes from another country. What I have to do, however, is do the due diligence to certify that the steel that's being used is correct. Maybe I do some sampling of those steel pieces. Maybe I visit the plant as it's being constructed to see how they build steel. Maybe the same sort of analogy has to be used with software components, because we can't expect that everything is going to be built by hand. Whatever the case is, this is one of the reasons for licensure. Look, I'm putting my license, maybe even my freedom on the line. You can go to jail for various misdeeds as a professional engineer. You could certainly be fined big bucks. You could lose your license forever or for a period of time. So it makes one stop and pause before you do something that could potentially be problematic. If my license is on the line, I'm going to be a little careful before I say, yeah, let's just take that component, wrap it, and stick it in the system. And if I don't, if I am that flagrant, well, then I deserve maybe punishment for being so cavalier about something that's important. It's the same. My wife is a nurse, and guess what? If the doctor tells her to administer a drug and she believes that that drug would be harmful to the patient, she must tell the doctor, and she's actually done this when she used to work in cancer wards, I won't do it. And the doctor says, well, I'll fire you if you don't. Fire me. I will not administer that drug. She didn't get fired. The doctor was being a jerk. Professional engineers have to do the same thing. And my question is, if you're working as a software engineer without a license, are you as willing to take a stand than if you had these real skin in the game? Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know. But that's why people like licensure. You're putting something on the line when you make those decisions. You have something to lose. You have something to lose, so maybe you're going to be a little more careful. The last thing, I got to wrap up here. Might go 5 minutes over time for questions, but I thought about Asimov's laws of robotics. Some of you may remember that from his famous anthology, I, Robot. And I wondered, I won't read these to you, you can read these. I wondered if we could adapt these somehow for software in a way that would get around the need for a taxonomy, or even those questions that I proposed earlier today, or juries and judges dealing with the issue. And so I created my set of Asimov's laws where a software may not injure a human being through inaction, or through inaction allow a human being to be injured. And I defined injury so that it was more encompassing. Software shall respond to commands given to it, that is, unless it would violate Law 1. And then the system must protect itself against attack from an adversary, whatever, unless it would violate Laws 1 and 2. I'm being a little cavalier here, but I thought that would be fun to look at. So, we talked about the issues of should licenses be required, and I really don't want to debate that. By the way, I've written a number of articles, others have, both pro and con this issue. The truth is it's going to happen. It's happening, and whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter, but you do want to consider, would you want to hire someone who took this personal risk versus someone who didn't? Versus the other option, which is to hire a big company, or to hire, use the government as a exemption. Risk does tend to raise standards of behavior and decision making. We know that. Just ask some of our multiple letter friends in the government, like the IRS. Licensing doesn't prevent failures, right? There are lots of cases of licensed doctors messing up, licensed nurses, accountants, and so on. There's no guarantees against introducing defects. That's not what we're talking about here. But we think it will raise the standard of practice and help assure the public that the components that are being furnished have some minimal level, were produced by someone with a minimal level of competency. Hopefully this will lead to safer, more secure, more reliable systems, but we do need to understand a lot more about how to, I hate to say it, apportion responsibility and blame in order to make sure that the best standards of practice are followed. Lots of research opportunities, I think. Not much of it is formal research, or formalized research, or formulaic. A lot of social science research involved here, I think. We need a comprehensive way to identify systems that would come under the licensure laws, and a legal framework, a technical and legal framework for assigning responsibility. We need a strategy for dealing with third-party components wherever they come from. Probably could take 5 minutes for questions, I guess, before this young lady, and then I'll take your question. Go ahead.
Actually, two issues. The first one is there seems to be an emphasis on ABET, and we at our university decided not to go ABET because they could either spend a year in science and spend a year in business.
Mm-hmm.
They would do much better, out in the
Do you want me to answer that, or you just wanted to state that?
No, you could, but the second issue is really more important, okay? And that is that I was in the industry 17 years, and let me tell you, the biggest reason that when I was in the industry, because horrible software was the schedules that we were under. And so you can license people and all the rest of it, but when it comes right down to it, if someone's working a 60-hour work week, okay, and that's because they just want to hang on to their job, the economy sucks, okay, then, you know, you can't blame the people who are programming when it's really, you know, management schedules that are causing a good portion of failures. The people who are programming sometimes know what needs to be done, but they can't do it.
I'll answer your two questions in order. The first one, the ABET. Let me repeat the question. The first question had to do with some universities have chosen not to pursue ABET accreditation. How would that affect the licensure process for those who graduate from non-ABET schools? It doesn't necessarily. Remember, this is the state boards of licensure that adopted this policy, this requirement. However, virtually every state law provides an exemption that says if either an ABET accredited program or closely related program. So it could be, for example, that the program is not ABET accredited, or even that you completed your degree not in software engineering but in computer science, which is closely related. The licensure laws typically allow for that. However, oftentimes they require, say, an extra year of experience to compensate for that. Okay, but you know, if you want to argue that, you need to argue with each and every state board, because this is what they've chosen to do. They've chosen to make a decision about what's important when it comes to protecting the public, just as each and every university makes a decision about what is important to them to teach students when they go out in the world, whether they want them to have business experience as well as engineering experience. The second question had to do with, in her experience, the greatest source of failure has to do with schedule pressures. And you know, how can you hold someone responsible when they were, say, under tremendous pressure to deliver? There's a few things there. First of all, say 60 hours a week. I mean, first of all, that's an anecdotal statement, and I don't know that the research would support that entirely, but it doesn't matter. Anecdotally, I agree with you. People who work under pressure make mistakes. But if they're working for a company that's telling them to work on multiple projects or work 60 hours a week or more, that person probably wouldn't need to be licensed anyway because they're exempted under the industrial exemption of the company. The company would get sued. How dare you have people working on mission-critical systems without getting rest? It's the same reason why we have, you know, pilot rest schedules for airline pilots. If an individual were working that way, as a sole practitioner and working 100 hours a week on mission-critical software, I think they deserve to be punished for not knowing better. Now they're only imposing those risks, those schedule constraints on themselves. It's the same thing as having doctors who are working around the clock and not getting sleep and doing surgery. That patient is injured because of that exhaustion and the doctor makes a mistake. They're going to get sued. And you know, whether, I don't know anything about the liability laws for physicians and how they're protected if they sign a piece of paper that says, I won't work more than X hours without rest. I don't know. But it causes these issues to come to the forefront, and they're important issues. And they need to be explored. This gentleman over... Oh, you moved closer. Oh, okay.
My question was very similar to what the professor has said. I'm a professor of software engineering, and I've been in the industry both as a developer and as a manager for a number of years. Many times, the software engineer has no say about the schedule or how long he's going to have to test, because his manager is pulling the string back on him, and if he doesn't do it, he's going to be fired.
Mm-hmm.
And even more today, in the economy as it is, you can be fired. I mean, in California, software engineers, they have an at-will contract, right?
Do we want to be less professional than nurses?
No. But my point is, who is going to sign the responsibility?
You are, as the engineer.
Software engineer, his manager, the director, or the CEO?
Well, if you're talking about, maybe you didn't hear me, if you're talking about a layered organization where there's directors, CEOs, and managers, you're talking about a company that would would afford an industrial exemption, right, to that individual who's working as a software engineer. It might be that somewhere in the hierarchy there is a software engineering, vice president of engineering as a PE, and they're putting their license on the line. But if you're talking about a hierarchy, as both of you are, you're talking about something very different. Remember, we're talking about typically a single person working as a solo practitioner, calling themselves an engineer, no formal training, they haven't passed the exam, and representing that they know how to build software appropriately. So don't think about layered organizations, don't think about problems with management, we all know about those. Think about engineers who are working as solo practitioners and who are self-regulating, doing the wrong thing.
That's fine. My purpose here is not to make any of your statements difficult. Because I have lived there in this environment.
Me too.
I know what influences what. The case of one software engineer is clear cut.
Right.
It's easy.
So we don't need to talk about the other case because it doesn't apply.
Well, but the other cases are the most common.
Let me finish. Go ahead now. Okay.
The other cases are the most common. Usually, I work for Lockheed, I work for IBM, I've developed software for this and that, and I have an organization above me.
But we're not trying to solve that problem here. We're not trying to solve that problem here. I mean, let's keep our eye on the ball. Was there another question? Sir.
It might be a cultural thing, but I don't really understand the purpose. I think very early on you said it was a qualification or a licensure for competence. But you keep saying that if you're a large organisation, you don't actually have to employ competent engineers.
No, I didn't say that.
Well,
Did I say that?
that's the impression, because every time you've covered if it's a large organisation,
Well,
you said that in that case they can be sued.
Right.
Now, if I'm a member of the public, I don't want large organisations to be able to say, yeah, well, we've got loads of money, we can pay out $100 million, but we can employ lots of non-licensed engineers, which from my perspective as a naive member of the public are less competent than your licensed engineers. If the scheme is to actually encourage competence, why don't you actually make everyone who's in a position of building these safety-related systems be licensed? Or is it because the large organisations have actually come along and said, no,
No.
we'll protect our
No. There's a mechanism by which large organizations and their incompetence are eliminated, and it's called the market. And I don't like hearing the urban legends about companies sitting around on corporate boards, and I sit on corporate boards, discussing whether they should spend an extra penny on testing here and there, for $4 million versus the cost of actually litigating that. No company that I know of does that. No company, there are whistleblower laws. No company that did that would exist for long periods of time. I think we have to accept that most companies that I know, every company I know of, wants to be the best that they can be. I don't think there are boards of directors sitting around and thinking about how they can be incompetent and manage to survive. Yes, they look for ways to cut corners. Yes, they look for ways to push employees to squeeze every last ounce of work that they can get from them. But once again, the market adjusts. Those good employees leave, and the bad employees stay, leaving that company gutted, and those companies go under. So I think there's a sense that the market tends to protect against that kind of malpractice, and after all, those big companies have the most to lose. The worry is when you have an individual who has nothing to lose, who through deception represents themselves one way or another as a doctor, a nurse, or an engineer, to protect the public against that kind of deception. This is the only mechanism we have. It wouldn't be easy for you to go and work for a big company and portray yourself as an engineer through deception. It happens.
Yeah, but if I'm a nurse or a doctor and I'm working for a large hospital, it doesn't mean I don't have to be licensed.
It doesn't mean you what?
I don't have to be licensed.
That is true. That is true. Same goes for accountants.
Software engineers different.
Well, these things take time. Today, no software engineer has to be licensed. As I mentioned before, wasn't until Well, it's a first step, perhaps. It's a first step. But I don't know what licensure boards want to do. For engineering, no company that I know of has all licensed professional engineers. What they often have is a small number of licensed engineers who are in charge and who supervise the work of others who are not licensed. And it's those who are in charge who they're putting their reputations, their license, and so forth on the line. Because it would be impossible and it would be impractical to require licensure for every trade, every profession, and every individual. Why do we do it for nurses and doctors? Probably, and I'm only opining here, probably because they have the most direct. It's very easy to ascribe injury to humans in those practices. It's a little harder when we start removing ourselves a few handshakes away. You know, accountants, how do they cause harm? We can come up with scenarios. Engineers, they can cause harm. We've talked about those scenarios, and we talked about some questionable scenarios. But with physicians, with nurses, and even with tattoo artists, let's say, or with hairdressers, because they are physically having contact with human beings, it's a lot easier to contrive how they could screw up and hurt someone. Do we have time? We probably only have time for one more. This gentleman way in the back, I want to pick some.
Just going to mention that in engineers, it's not uncommon to have 300 engineers working on a bridge. You don't normally have 300 doctors working on a case.
Right.
And that may be one reason why every doctor's licensed and not every engineer is licensed.
That's a great point. I hope they captured it there. That in medicine, you don't have hundreds of doctors working on a case. You have one or two or three. It's not so with the engineer. I'll make one last point, and then I'll close. Oh, one more question, and then I want to make a closing point. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you very much. Really neat talk. My question has to do with scenarios in which the blame may not be placeable. For instance, if doctors sometimes experience adverse results, and if they followed accepted principles of care or practices of care, when that happens, they're still not liable. Do you see something analogous happening in this field?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, and I teach my students this even though I know most of them will not become software engineers. You know, if they're going to test the software, have a documented plan of attack, right? Have a purposeful test plan that shows what test steps you're taking. And if there are still defects in the software, and there will be, at least in a court of law or in front of a board of your peers or your supervisors, and they say, how come something went wrong? I say, well, gee, you know, here's what we did to ensure the integrity of this code. I guess obviously it wasn't enough. We have to find out why. As opposed to, well, we tested it for a few hundred hours willy-nilly, and gee, it's a wonder that things didn't work. That's not defensible. The last comment I'll make as a close is, I mean, this is a very emotional topic. I even get emotional defending it. A lot of people I know get very upset about, well, why won't, does this mean I can't call myself an engineer if I don't pass this stupid test or these two stupid tests? And I say to them, well, why is that so important to you, that you be called an engineer and not, you know, a software specialist? Or why is it so important that you become an engineer? And when you begin to think about it, well, it's because there's a stature that's afforded to engineers. It's a respected profession. And there's a reason why it's respected, because it's not one that you can stumble into. So we can't have it both ways. We can't say that we want to have the respect that's afforded to physicians or other professions where there's a great amount of rigor involved, and at the same time say, well, we just want to be able to call ourselves an engineer by one path, another, or any other. And so, look, I want to remind you that I think that a tiny number of people are going to be affected by this, not a lot of people. Certainly not us professors. We professors will not be. We're safe. That is, unless we start teaching our students to do the wrong